The Young and the Restless spoilers Thurdays full episodes August 28, 2025. In the uneasy quiet that descends after a storm, the kind that leaves the sea glassy and the air heavy with unshed rain, Kane sits alone at the small galley table aboard a leased boat and stares at a phone that has too many histories trapped inside it. A lifeline and a weapon and a mirror all at once. The table is cluttered with practical things, charts, a stainless steel thermos, a pen he hasn't clicked in an hour, and with one thing that is not practical at all, a letter with edges gone soft from being opened and smoothed and opened again, its handwriting unmistakable. Genevieve's hand. His mother's words thread through him like a haunting refrain, every sentence reminding him that time is elastic but consequences are not, that the past does not stay buried just because you sail far enough away from the shore that built you. On the top of the phone is a single photo of Lily, the sort of candid that captures her when she wasn't looking, sun across her cheekbone, laughter barely there, the light in her eyes carrying the lives of two children now grown. It is this small square of memory that finally steadies his heartbeat, because if he speaks now, if he records it cleanly and honestly and refuses the varnish of self-defense, maybe his voice will reach Maddie and Charlie with something more substantial than excuses. He presses the button and the red dot appears and he hears the hush of his own breath in the speaker, and he begins, not with flourishes but with the simplicity truth requires. It has been a long time, he says, and it would be easy to let more time pass and pretend the words would simply deliver themselves, but he will not do that, not this time. Not after everything that has bent and broken because he thought he could carry secrets without cutting the people he loves. To get here he had to admit what the last days with Colin did to him, how the old man's voice still rasped with swagger even in the shallow end of breath, how his eyes held that flicker of mischief and manipulation that had drawn and burned so many around him, Jill included. Kane remembers the sterile sweetness of the room where they sat, remembers the cheap plastic of the hospital pitcher and the dry rattle of the cup as he lifted it, remembers the way his own smile worked against gravity as he told Colin to save what little breath he had and drink. It should have been a simple kindness, a son coaxing a father to keep his throat from cracking, but nothing with Colin was ever simple. Even then, in the thin light that creeps around blinds at a late hour, in the slipstream of goodbyes that never land cleanly, Colin was needling, asking why Kane and Jill cared at all, what kind of game they were really playing, whether love and duty were ever separate for people like them. He had the gall to smirk between sips, to imply that the only reasons to show up were transactional ones, as if family must be a ledger and grief must be a tactic. Kane felt the familiar heat rise in his chest, the mixture of shame and fury that comes from knowing you were forged in a fire set by someone who enjoyed watching others blister. He swallowed it, because there was no point to wounding a man already at the end of his runway, and because there was one last piece of work to do that required a steady hand, a letter, not from Colin but about him, a letter that had found its way to Kane with a cruelty that felt like fate. Genevieve's letter, the one outlining not sentiment, but assets and fraud and the kind of meticulous theft that dances as partnership, made plain what he had once tried not to see. Colin had stripped what did not belong to him. He had left paper trails meant to disappear. He had folded Genevieve's name into structures that profited only him. This was not a dramatic reveal meant to dominate a dinner party in Genoa City, it was an inventory of betrayals written in legal arteries, bloodless and cold. And once Kane had read it, once he had understood that restitution was not a favor but an obligation, he knew that any plan to leverage these truths for leverage again was only another link in a chain he had sworn to break. That is what made the conversation with Phyllis so precarious and so necessary. She had expected him to keep walking the path they had surveyed together, a path made of strategy and nervous laughter and the kind of beautiful, terrible competence at which she excels. She is many things, unapologetically brilliant, incandescently driven, allergic to being handled, and she understood immediately that whatever they were doing could be reshaped into something surgical. She had a plan that demanded precision. A sequence of disclosures that would leave rivals staggering, a timing that would pry a few boards loose from the corporate floors everyone else thought were solid. When Kane told her he would not continue, that he was stepping off the edge they had drawn, her eyes widened not with fear but with the electric calculation of a woman subtracting and adding at the speed of instinct. Disbelief arrived first, then the offended grace of a person who does not appreciate being blindsided, then the flash of fight. She asked him if this was fear of blowback, if he was being bought, if old loyalties were forcing his hands into his pockets. Kane told her the truth she did not want and did not expect, that the plan could succeed and still be the wrong thing, that winning at the cost of becoming a ghost to his own children was a ledger entry he refused to carry. She challenged the sentimentality of that, reminded him that intentions do not rebuild companies or reputations or families, and he agreed with the logic even as he refused the application. He told her about the letter, about Genevieve's estate and the assets he now understood were not his to deploy as if they were poker chips in a high-stakes game, about how he had spent too many years learning to build and rebuild and never once pausing to tell Lily and the kids who he was trying to become. The irony was not lost on either of them. He had perfected the art of appearing open without ever being clear. In that moment Phyllis did something that surprised him. She did not try to lure him back with a sweeter deal or a cleverer angle. She allowed the silence to do the arithmetic and then, with a curt nod that was equal parts respect and frustration, she told him to make sure that if he walked away it was toward something. It felt like a benediction carved from flint. Back on the boat, the world narrowed to the red and the sound of his own voice. He spoke to Maddie and Charlie as if they were in the next room and he had only to open the door. He admitted what pride so often edits, that they had grown into fantastic people without needing a grand design from him, that their competence and conscience were their own triumphs, not his trophies, that he had missed moments he would not get back because he thought the way to protect a family was to build fortresses rather than bridges. He told them the part that hurt to say, that he had failed them more than once, failed them by omission as much as by mistake, failed them by chasing scale and forgetting to narrate his purpose. He described, not as justification but as a map, how he had built a company in the spaces between questions he did not answer, how he had thought boldness would be its own absolution, how he had never planned for the human cost because he was too busy planning the next move. He told them about Genevieve and her letter and the way that reading it felt like stepping into cold water, shocking enough to wake him and clean enough to demand change. He told them about Colin's last days, about the water and the smirk and the way a father can tilt a son's compass long after the son tells himself he has rewired it. He told them that the last thing he ever wanted for them was a father they could not lean on, a man who says the right words with the wrong weight, a strategist who can calculate risks but cannot hold his children's gaze. He told them he was changing what could be changed now, which was not the past but the posture he took toward it. Woven through this confession was Lily, because her absence is its own kind of presence. Kane spoke of her not as an audience he had failed but as a person whose standard still calibrates him. He remembered the mundane miracles, the ones that do not make headlines but make a household. The time she stood beside him in a fluorescent-lit grocery aisle and made a soggy Tuesday feel like a future, the way she warmed a room by choosing to believe people could do better without being naive about the odds. He said her name only once on the recording, because names are flint and he didn't need a spark to burn down what he was trying to rebuild. But he allowed himself to wonder aloud how different things might have been if, in those early days when ambition was a rush and secrecy felt like protection, he had told Lily not just what he wanted to accomplish but why he needed to accomplish it in a way that left him proud in a decade. He did not romanticize or grovel. He simply acknowledged that love gives you tailwinds when you're honest and crosswinds when you're not, and that he had flown crooked for too long. He promised nothing he could not deliver, no overnight renovations, no manifesto dressed up as a plan. He promised to make restitution where restitution was due, to unwind what had been wound too tightly, to return what never should have been repurposed, to stop treating risk as a kind of heroism, and to start treating presence as the currency his family has always needed more than victory. The logistics of change are never cinematic, so he narrates them in the same steady tone. He explains to his kids how the assets in question will be traced, how the shell structures that once served as armor will be dismantled with the same meticulous care they were constructed, how legal counsel will move quietly so that scandal does not eclipse substance. He acknowledges that Jill is entangled whether she wants to be or not, because loving Colin pulled her into orbits that did not respect gravity, and he makes a point of separating accounts, histories, and accountability. He will not let the mess metastasize just because it is complicated. He will reach out to those who were hurt by Colin's appetites, and where the paper trail leads to restitution he will follow it, not grudgingly but as a rule. He assures Maddie and Charlie that this is not theater, not a play for optics or a bid to win headlines or hearts. It is the work of setting things down so that he can carry what belongs to him without leaning. He does not ask for their forgiveness on a timetable. He asks only that they consider the possibility that a man can recalibrate without rewriting history, that it is possible to look a lineage in the eye and choose to keep the parts that are strong and shed the parts that corrode. He tells them that being their father is not a credential he can frame but a vow he can keep, and that keeping it will look like fewer announcements and more attendance. When the first recording ends, he saves it and starts another, not to rehash but to deepen. He remembers specific moments. Showing up at a school doorway late and out of breath because he took a call he should have sent to voicemail, promising a weekend and then burying himself in a deal that would not have evaporated if he had drawn a boundary, standing in a living room with Lily and insisting that the final steps of a plan were harmless because he could not tolerate the idea that he might have calculated wrong. He calls these by their names: self-importance, stubbornness, the belief that outworking a problem makes you immune to its morality, and then he squares them with the man he intends to be for the rest of his life. He tells Maddie and Charlie what he wishes someone had told him when he was their age, that not thinking small is admirable, but thinking big is not an excuse to think alone, that brilliance without transparency curdles into manipulation. That the strongest families are not the ones who never fail but the ones who say, out loud and on the record, this is where it went wrong and this is how we will do it differently. He invites them to hold him to this. He hands them, in effect, the power to call him back to himself. On shore, there will be ripples Kane cannot control. Phyllis will recalibrate at a speed that would impress a fighter pilot, replacing his role in the plan with a workaround that reduces exposure and increases leverage, because that is what she does, she finds angles in the dark. Some will call him a coward for stepping away, others a hero for refusing to stack one exploitation on top of another. Both readings miss the point. Jill will bristle at the implication that restitution is an indictment, and she will likely remind him, with a sharp tenderness that only Jill can carry, that surviving Colin required decisions that made sense in the moment. There will be nights when Kane wants to defend himself with rhetoric and history and the neatness of spreadsheets. He will resist that. He will bring invoices to attorneys and bring himself to the people he loves. He will not use a podium when a porch will do. Genoa City will do what it always does, spin, its gossip mills and business boards grinding through the newest data point until the next one arrives. He cannot halt the orbit, but he can refuse to feed it anything that tastes like theater. And because memory is a stubborn teacher, Kane will keep returning to that room where Colin's voice tried on humility like a borrowed jacket, and to that boat where Genevieve's letter made a quiet vow become kinetic. He will keep pressing the red and speaking in the plainest verbs he knows, not because repetition absolves but because clarity withstands pressure. He will tell his children that he now understands why I never anticipated the consequences is not an apology but a diagnosis, and that treatment involves more than words. He will draw maps for them not of assets and acquisitions but of mornings and afternoons he intends to spend being reachable, being visible, being ordinary in the most radical way a man like him can be. He will tell them that he once believed bigness would save them, and he now believes that goodness will. He will not wear sackcloth in public. He will not perform penitence. He will choose, again and again, the small faithful acts that make families resilient, showing up early and staying late, calling when he says he will, asking questions he is prepared to hear the answers to, building things that do not require secrecy to stand. If there is a moral to the chapter he is writing, it is not that villains die and heroes prevail. It is that inheritance is not only money and property but patterns and postures, and that a man can decide which ones his children receive. The final minutes of his message carry the gentlest courage he owns. He tells Maddie and Charlie that they do not owe him a response, that their distance belongs to them, that he will respect whatever boundaries they need to feel safe. He tells them, nonetheless, where he will be on certain dates and at certain times, the way you tell someone where a lighthouse is even if they never sail that way again. He thanks Lily without naming the ledger of things she endured on his way to clarity. He signs off not with a flourish but with a promise tucked into a simple sentence: I am going to be the kind of father you can lean on by being the kind of man who does not make you guess what matters to him. The red dot winks out. The boat rocks once, twice, as if acknowledging a new equilibrium. Outside, the water is still. Inside, Kane begins to do the work he has been avoiding, and because this is Genoa City, the world will keep testing him. But the tests will look different now. They will not be about how much he can get away with while convincing himself he is building something noble. They will be about how much he can give back while becoming someone ordinary and true. In a life full of dazzling schemes and dangerous proximity to other people's appetites, he has finally chosen the only plan that can hold: to repair what can be repaired, to return what never belonged to him, to refuse to turn confession into spectacle, and to make sure that if his children ever find themselves watching the horizon for him, they will not see a storm gathering, they will see a steady light that does not blink. He begins with the sentence he has been avoiding for years, the one that tastes like metal in his mouth because it is both confession and autopsy. He thought he could split his life cleanly down the middle and keep both halves shining. In the recording meant for Maddie and Charlie, he does not dress it up. He explains how he convinced himself that the tender rituals of fatherhood and the harsher calculus of survival could be kept in separate rooms with separate rules. How he believed that if he shut the door carefully enough on one, the other would never smell the smoke. He admits that it worked for a while, at least on paper. He jokes, quietly, at his own expense about how men who think in spreadsheets always get fooled by what doesn't fit in a cell. He circles the truth with unflinching detail, every secret justified as protection. Every late night just another short-term loss for a long-term win, every carefully phrased promise a bridge he swore he'd reinforce when things calmed down. He reminds them that he loved their mother in the way that made him reckless and reverent at once, that he loved them with the terrified ambition of someone who grew up without reliable maps. And that love without honesty is still a kind of storm. He tells them about the last days with Colin and the letter from Genevieve and the way inheritance can be both gift and indictment. He says, aloud, that he sees now how the halves he kept apart leaked into each other the entire time, that nothing in a human life is airtight for long. That the weakest seam always finds a way to split just when the pressure is greatest. He doesn't hear the footfall at first. Only the faint movement of air down the corridor and the way the boat's hull seems to register a second presence. When he finally presses stop, the silence after his own voice feels enormous. And from the galley doorway comes Phyllis, arms loosely folded, eyes glittering with a curiosity she doesn't bother to hide. Her posture says she has been there for a beat. Her silence says she wanted to know whether he would flinch when he heard her. She doesn't toy with him. She asks, point blank, whether he sent the message. He shakes his head. A small gesture with a heavy gravity, and all the ways she could react crowd the moment: sarcasm, scolding. He bristles, because bristling is what he does when someone aims at the soft part of him. He tells her not to defend him, not to gild his mess. Or will he direct it toward forensic transparency that disarms those very tactics? That's when her gaze catches the corner of the letter on the table. The one worn soft by his hands and heavy with his mother's insistence that the truth belongs to the daylight. Phyllis is incapable of not asking the obvious questions. What is it? How much does it change? Who moved first? He tells her Victor made the asking the obvious questions. What is it? How much does it change? Who moved first? He tells her Victor made the next move already. Not with a roar but with the quiet precision of a man who can shift market weather with a whisper and a lunch meeting. She doesn't flinch at the name, she catalogues angles, contingencies, countermeasures. He slides the letter toward her because keeping it tucked under his palm feels too much like the old life. She reads in quick, efficient bursts. A woman trained to digest clauses and footnotes at velocity, and the shape of her mouth changes as she reaches the part about European assets and the castle that never had an honest foundation. How did Colin get a castle, she wants to know, as if the absurdity of the noun itself might make the predicate less grim. By tricking a woman out of what he called a small fortune, Kane says. And the cruelty of the adjective lands like a coin dropped in a church. Small. As if what can be stolen painlessly is just a matter of the thief's appetite. Phyllis says, not unkindly, that the woman probably loved him. It is not an absolution, it is a forensic note about motive and access. Kane nods and, almost against his will, says that Jill loved him in the same pattern, part devotion, part gravity well, and that this is the knot he cannot cut with a single clean pull. Telling the truth about the damage without turning Jill's heart into evidence against her. They talk then about Jill in the way people talk about a storm they both survived, wry, careful, affectionate, edged. Jill is a force who understands both legacy and reinvention better than anyone else in Genoa City. She has rebuilt out of worse rubble than this. And yet the thought of opening this particular vein makes Kane's stomach tighten. He sketches what he intends to do with the letter, the audits, and the cascade of filings it points toward. He will make restitution, not because it is strategically wise but because it is morally non-negotiable. He will shield Jill from unnecessary spectacle without protecting the choices that caused harm. He will not allow love, past or present, to be twisted into a liability that nullifies accountability. Phyllis tests his plans the way an engineer taps a weld. Where are the weak points? She admits that the speed is intoxicating and that the power is dangerous, and that being the first to set the ethics will not keep the bad actors from sprinting past the guardrails. Kane listens and recognizes himself in her hunger to bend capability toward justice. He also recognizes the ground where a good mission can become a clean excuse to hurt the wrong people faster. He tells her he will help if help means building a standard, not if help means becoming another well-dressed weapon. If help means building a standard, not if help means becoming another well-dressed weapon. She appreciates the line. She doesn't move it. Victor's shadow lengthens across every sentence because that is what he does. He becomes the gravitational constant in every room without needing to be present. Kane describes what he knows of the next move, an acquisition pattern that will look benign until it isn't, a rumor temperature strategy designed to make honest players chase ghosts. A set of off-balance offers that force weaker hands into sales they swore they'd never make. Phyllis has seen this dance before and is uninterested in playing the expected beat. If Kane won't be the wedge inside Newman's next play, then she will turn his absence into an advantage, less cruelty, more surprise. She will shape a counter-narrative built on receipts instead of whispers, learning from his letter that the only thing that punctures a myth cleanly is a document signed in permanent ink. She also knows the optics around Kane are now volatile, the man reconsidering his entire operating system, the son of a con man refusing to con. The ex-husband who could sell his pain for sympathy and refuses to charge admission. She tells him that if he wants to be invisible to the predator, he must first be visible to the people he loves. It is not a hallmark sentiment, it is tactical truth. Predators thrive in the gaps where a man tries to be two things at once. The boat breathes and the day leans toward evening. The kind of violet light that makes even hard metal look softer. The letter lies between them like a small country that has not yet chosen its government. Kane picks up his phone again. And this time he does not press record. He scrolls instead, reading the first lines of what he has already said to his children, and understands that not sending is just another well-produced delay. He composes a subject line that doesn't tremble and a sentence that does not apologize for existing. He tells them, in text that will arrive before the audio finishes uploading, that there is a message coming, not to ask for forgiveness but to set the table for a different kind of talk. He promises no immediate follow-ups, no pressure to respond. Just the courtesy of knowing the shape of what is on the way. Phyllis watches him without leaning over his shoulder. She knows the cost of making a private act feel surveilled. He hovers for a beat. That old reflex twitching, one more proofread, one more stall, And then he taps send because every minute he saves now is a minute he used to steal from them. There is no cinematic payoff. The screen does not light up with instant receipts or warm absolutions. The only sound is the faint hum of the boat's generator and the way the water keeps its own counsel. That is, in a strange way, the relief. He doesn't need fireworks. He needs to move the next right piece. He gathers the documents that must be seen by counsel and flags the items that will need Jill's eyes. He writes her a note that is both armored and open, the tone you take with someone who knows all your worst and best moves and loves you enough to refuse both your self-pity and your self-mythology. He does not mention the castle right away. He asks for a meeting in a room without windows where truth can clatter without echo. He outlines the restitution plan. Makes it clear that he will not let her take the blame for what she did not do, and refuses, politely, firmly, to let anyone primary her heart as the proximate cause of another man's theft. Phyllis, for her part, pivots into execution with the elegance of a matador. She catalogues what the letter unlocks, which filings can be compelled quietly, where the AI can be legally and ethically tasked with pattern finding that accelerates repair rather than scandal. Exactly. It is regard. He watches her go and feels both lighter and more accountable. That is the paradox he has resisted his entire adult life. The more you admit, the more you can carry without collapsing. He imagines Maddie seeing the notification on her screen in a campus library. Charlie pausing between shifts long enough to feel his phone buzz and frown at his own heart for answering. Authorizing the repayments with specific interest rates that make restitution real, alerting a small circle of board members that a note is coming so that rumor doesn't get to set the tone. He deletes 3 sentences that sound like performance and keeps the one that sounds like him now. He drinks water. He calls an attorney and uses the word repair twice and win not at all. Night arrives without incident. That, too, feels like a kind of grace. That, too, feels like a kind of grace. He feels the boat rock once and thinks of the way Colin used to turn every gentle sway into an opportunity to tip someone overboard, metaphorically if not literally. He sits with what Phyllis said about AI being a tool that amplifies the user, about speed without scruple being just another way to make cruelty efficient. He understands that the next months will be full of tests designed to catch him between his halves, to tempt him into cleverness when what his children finally need is clarity. He knows Victor will not stop moving because one man decided to be better. He knows Jill will not be grateful for every truth on the first day she hears it. He knows Lily will receive the ripples anyway, grace or not, because that is how consequence behaves. He does not make any grand vows to the moon. He makes a small one to himself. That the life he kept sorted into 2 rooms will be renovated into one, messy and honest, where his children can visit without needing to change shoes at the door. Morning is the opposite of drama and exactly what he requires. He wakes before his alarm and resists the urge to check his phone first. When he finally looks, there is nothing yet from Maddie or Charlie, and that is acceptable because their silence is not a verdict, it is a boundary, and he has promised to honor boundaries. He sends one line to both. No rush, I just wanted you to know I'm here when you're ready. He drafts the memo that will set the legal gears in motion to return what Colin took and to Mark, in writing. The difference between generational damage and generational patterns. He reviews the protocol Phyllis sent overnight, human review steps, audit trails, red team tests, and he smiles because it is exactly like her to give him a way to use power without letting power use him. He makes coffee he doesn't really taste and prints the letter one more time because hard copies still feel like contracts with himself. He begins the cascade of calls that will bring the castle back into honest circulation and the woman who was robbed into a position to decide what justice feels like to her, not to him. If Jill is furious today, he will let her be. If Victor snarls, he will not echo the sound. If the city that thrives on spectacle calls this an act or an angle, he will let the work become his only answer. And if, at some point late in the day, A reply arrives from one of his children, one word or a paragraph or just a read receipt, he will not treat it as a trophy. He will treat it like what it is, the first creak of a hinge. The sound a door makes when air and light find the seam. He had told himself for years that he could keep his life in tidy compartments, that the version of Cain who made surgical decisions under pressure would never bleed into the version who made grilled cheese on a Saturday afternoon and waited up through a fever. That one could be a strategist and the other a father, and that the air between those two rooms would never mingle no matter how many doors slammed or how many windows he tried to nail shut. The recording he made that afternoon on the rocking boat was the first time he said, out loud and with the mic hot, that he had been wrong. He spoke to Maddie and Charlie in a voice that carried both the weight of a man unlearning his favorite lie and the unexpected lightness of finally telling it. He explained that the compartments had always leaked. That secrecy dressed up as protection eventually warps into avoidance, that love cannot be quarantined from consequence, and that the ledger he kept in his head, wins, losses, risks well taken, was useless to two kids who needed presence more than perfection. He told them he loved them, not as an opening gambit but as the spine running through everything else, and he told them he knew love without clarity had not felt like love at all. He promised that from here on he would stop thinking of his life as two halves and start living one honest whole, and the moment his thumb hovered over the stop button he felt the boat take on another kind of weight, the awareness of a listener standing just out of frame. Phyllis had a way of arriving like a theory and a test at the same time. She had come down the short corridor without hurry, and at first Cain only felt the change in air, the slight shift in the boat's balance, the quiet that follows a sentence you cannot take back. When he finally turned, she was there in the galley entry, arms loosely crossed, expression a poised mix of curiosity and impatience. She asked if he had sent the message. He hadn't. The old reflex twitched. One more edit, one more excuse, and he reached for it before he realized his hand was empty. Phyllis didn't lecture. She cut to the thing that mattered. If you love them and they love you, stop workshopping your heart like a press release and send the damn message. He bristled at her bluntness, told her not to defend him or rationalize him or turn this into yet another operation with milestones and KPIs. She didn't flinch. She said she wasn't defending him at all, she was forcing his actions to catch up to his words. It took less time than a sigh for the conversation to tilt from the personal to the mission she had been running, an investigation that now lived at the intersection of power and technology. She framed it with the clean economy of someone who has already done the homework, artificial intelligence as an accelerant, not a magic trick. A tool that can either supercharge rumor mills and stock manipulation or expose patterns of misconduct at a speed and scale human eyes cannot hold. Then her attention snagged on the letter on the table, its edges softened by too much handling, the ink a little blurred where Cain's thumb had pressed. What is that? How much does it change? Who moved first? Victor, Cain said, already made his next move. Of course he had. She read Genevieve's letter with the speed of a litigator and the focus of a chess player. The inventory of assets and the map of fraud were clinical and devastating at once, and when she reached the part about the European property, the castle that had become both a monument to excess and a shrine to a con, her mouth twisted with equal parts disbelief and recognition. How did Colin get a castle? The answer tasted like metal in Cain's mouth even now. By charming a lovely elderly woman out of what he called a small fortune, by spending her time freely until she gave him more than her afternoons, by wrapping theft in gratitude and naming it an inheritance. Phyllis muttered that the woman probably loved him, not to excuse it but to identify the access point. Then, almost reflexively, she added that Jill had loved him in a pattern not entirely different, that devotion to Colin had always been a gravitational field and a blindfold. Cain admitted he had not known where the money had come from, admitted, too, that not knowing had been its own kind of choice. Then she snapped the line taut, he lied. Enough dissection. Enough moral origami to fold and refold the same guilt into prettier shapes. There was work to do, and the work was to unwind the damage without pretending it could be undone. Cain said they could go to dinner later and talk about next steps, and Phyllis, satisfied for the moment, slid the letter back toward him and left with the brisk efficiency of someone who had already built a mental checklist before she reached the door. When the latch clicked and his pulse steadied, he did the simplest and hardest thing on his list. He attached the audio file and sent it to Maddie and Charlie and to Lily. He did not linger over the subject line. He did not embroider the body of the email with preemptive apologies disguised as context. He added one clean sentence that said a message was coming and that he would not ask for an answer before they were ready to give one, and he pressed send before the old urge to curate the moment could grow teeth. The phone made the small sound that marks the difference between intention and action, and without waiting for the vacuum of silence to fill with doubt, he turned to the work of memory he had avoided for too long. The next flashback was a room he could enter and leave but not edit. Colin, both diminished and somehow no less dangerous for it, propped on pillows that looked expensive in a way that felt obscene, the air conditioned into sterility. A private clinic that absorbed money as if healing were a commodity that could be purchased without a moral receipt. Kane had said he was glad his father was still here, that they were paying the doctors enough to buy him time, that life, for at least another day, had chosen to be stubborn. Colin had closed his eyes as if even listening was a chore and said he was tired in the way of old animals and men who had outrun the consequences long enough to start believing in their own luck. He had told Kane to lean on his family, not on a name. Had called Aristotle Dumas a mask, an alias that might open doors but had no soul to protect, had insisted that the only name that mattered was Kane Ashby, because that was the one fate kept calling even when he tried to dodge it. Kane had said he would not let things go too far, the kind of line sons say to fathers when they are trying to sound both obedient and autonomous, and even then he had felt the sentence crumple under its own weight. Famous last words, he had muttered, half to the ceiling. Colin, who had never met a boundary he didn't try to coax into becoming an invitation, wanted to hear a plan, and when Kane kept his answer general, Colin did what he always did, he drove at the softest target. Was Kane thinking he could patch the leak by paying Lily off in the far future, 50 years and a deathbed away, letting interest and sentiment do what honesty refused to do now? The cruelty of that suggestion was so neat, so practical, so precisely calibrated to shame, that it took Kane a beat to realize it was not advice but a test. He said he would know the right time. Colin pushed, in the cooing voice he reserved for very young children and very ambitious men, and told him to bury Dumas forever, to walk away from the shadow identity and lock it in the ground so deep even memory would forget where it was planted. He used the word promise the way he used every word that mattered, as a rope disguised as ribbon. Memory gave way to the present with a small lurch of the stomach, the way a boat returns to the shape of the wave after a swell. Kane stared at the letter again and at the phone that had become the stage for his strangest performance of courage. He did not wait for the replies that might not come today. He did not translate silence into verdict. Instead he called the one person who could serve as both accelerant and accountability in the strange intersection where his repair work would have to live. He told Phyllis he had changed his mind. She asked if he meant dinner. No. He meant the plan, the whole clever thing they had assembled from leverage and nerves and late-night hypotheses about how the next quarter would unfold if they were as ruthless as the men they were trying to unseat. "It's broken," he said without drama, "and I'm not going forward." The words surprised him with how solid they felt when they landed. On the other end of the line, Phyllis did not gasp or pivot into persuasion. She exhaled slowly, the sound of a strategist recalculating the entire board in her head without moving a single piece on the table, and then she said good. Not because she wanted less power, but because she had wanted him to pick the person he said he was becoming over the persona that had kept him safe in rooms where safety was always rented and never owned.